Hello everyone and welcome back to Kobean History. In today's video of medieval professions, we are gonna have a look at the whipping boy. A whipping boy was a boy educated alongside a prince or a child monarch, who would receive punishment such as whipping or spanking for the prince's faults and wrongdoings. The prince would then have to watch this happen, and the thought was that seeing a friend being punished would deter him from making further faults. The reason a prince would not be punished himself was because his royal status would exceed the status of that of his tutor. That's how we see whipping boys nowadays anyway. And since the early 1600s, this narrative has been depicted in plays, literature, and more recently TV and movies. But how prominent were whipping boys actually? And did they actually exist in the way we see them today? The short answer is historians aren't 100% sure. Some say they did exist, others say it's a myth, and others still believe it only applied to boy kings and not mere princes, as kings were protected by divine right. But in today's video we will go over a few historical examples of what we can view as evidence of whipping boys, or the inspiration of the whipping boy myth, depending on your viewpoint. Whipping or spanking was a common punishment of tutors to correct the behavior of their pupils, but in this case the prince or child monarch would rank above the tutor. And because of this difference in rank, it should appear that the prince or child monarch should not have been beaten by their tutors. And while certain people at the time agreed with this, such as Erasmus, who mentions the inappropriateness of physical chastisement of princes in his books, it does not seem to have been a universally held belief, as there is evidence that some princes were indeed whipped by their tutors. Although it is suggested that nobles might have been beaten less often than other pupils. Whipping by proxy seemed to have risen in prominence during the Renaissance, and I only have one example that falls within the actual Middle Ages. That is the case of Conrad, king of Jerusalem and later Italy, who had 12 companions beaten in his stead by his tutors, so that King Conrad took great heed not to act wrongfully for pity of them. This account comes from a book written over half a century later, however. Henry FitzRoy, 1st Duke of Richmond and Somerset, was an illegitimate son of Henry VIII. And the next account comes from a letter from 1527, written by his tutor Richard Croke, in which he complained that Henry FitzRoy's usher, George Cotton, was undermining Croke's authority by withdrawing those boys whose punishment it was necessary to deter his princely pupil from the repetition of his faults from Croke's lectures. Cotton had done this because he felt it was unseemly for Croke to whip them in Henry FitzRoy's presence. So those were the first two examples, and these suggest that punishment by proxy was done, but they also mention multiple boys. So we can't yet say there is evidence of a designated boy serving as a whipping boy. Edward VI of England, the legitimate son this time of Henry VIII, had a boy named Barnaby Fitzpatrick, which would become the later 2nd Baron of Upper Ossory, at his court, and in Thomas Fuller's Church History of Britain, Fitzpatrick is mentioned to be Edward's proxy for correction, but this is considered a myth by some, since their tutor Richard Cox wrote of beating Edward with his staff, and the book was published over a century after Edward had died. Another account regarding Edward comes from Conrad Harrisbach. In his book he recounted that when he was in London in 1547, he was told that when the young king uttered profanities learned from a playmate, the friend was whipped in Edward's presence, and Edward was warned he deserved similar punishment. The future Charles I of England was tutored by Thomas Murray, alongside Murray's own nephew William Murray, and in Gilbert Burnet's History of My Own Time, William Murray is referred to as page and whipping boy. It has to be mentioned, however, that similarly to the previous account of Edward VI, this book was also published over a century after Charles I's youth. Now, we've mostly looked at English examples, but there are some from other places in Europe as well, which we will take a look at now. The future Frederick IV of Liegnitz, for whom Hans von Schweiningen was described in 1856 as the Prügeljunge by Gustav Freytag, popularizing the concept in Germany. Freytag's claim is not supported by other accounts regarding Schweiningen, and seeing as he wrote the book in the mid-1800s, this account might not be that trustworthy. But in the next account from France, we finally have some contemporary accounts. Governess Madame de Ventadour supplied the young Louis XV of France with playmates of his own age. One of these was Versailles cobbler's son, who was nicknamed Le Hussard. He received this nickname for a costume that he wore. Marie, Marquise du Deffand, who had lived during this time, wrote in her later life that this boy would be punished in the king's stead, and hence the victim of any bully was colloquially called their hussar. The Spanish royal princess had Francisco Alfonso de la Torre as a proxy to receive either slaps or the whip, according to the 1898 memoirs of François Courtin de Canrobert, who had served in the French army under de la Torre in 1842. There is also an account from Imperial China that I wanted to mention. Chinese imperial princes of the Qing dynasty had banner attendants, denoted by the Manchu term hahajusi. At first this meant youths educated alongside the prince, and later it came to mean his special reading partner and bodyguard. These were influential at first but later lost status as time went on. In 1876, the North China Herald commented on the announcement in the Peking Gazette of the start of the education of the 5-year-old Guangxu Emperor. The next appointment to be made will probably be that of the child who, according to Manchu imperial custom, shares His Majesty's studies under the name of Hahachutse, in the capacity of a souffre-douleur or whipping boy. Whenever the Son of Heaven is naughty or inattentive, the Hahachutse is beaten or disgraced. So, were whipping boys a real thing? You can decide for yourself on how to interpret these accounts. But in my opinion they both were and weren't. If you'd ask, was it an actual position at court, I'd say no. But if you'd ask me, did whipping boys exist? I'd say yes, but not necessarily in the way they are often described in literature, plays or TV shows. As there might not have been an actual designated whipping boy, but punishment by proxy does appear to have been a real thing that happened, although it would have been mostly in post-medieval times, according to these accounts. I hope you've enjoyed this video on the whipping boys. It was a little different than my usual medieval professions videos, but I hope you've enjoyed. If you want to see more medieval profession videos, you can find the playlist on screen right now. Or if you're interested in history as a whole, you can check out my channel to find a wider variety of historical topics.